Tuesday, September 25th, 2007. We're going to interview Edna Jacobson Burns, who is visiting here in Roscommon, for the purpose of getting a little more history of the little building that we acquired recently and her family's part in the life of Roscommon community. So first of all, Edna, I need you to say on the tape that this will belong to the Roscommon Area Historical Society.
Yes, this will become property of the Roscommon
Area.
Area Historical Society.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
we're good, yep. Let's start with how your family came to come to Roscommon, or why they came here.
Yes,
So tell us about your parents first, I guess, where they were born and raised and all that.
all right. My father was Victor Jacobson, and he was born in Jacobstad, Finland. At age 16, he decided it was probably his duty, since he was the oldest in the family of the children. And I remember him saying to me when he was recounting this, that if he left, there would be one less mouth to feed. So apparently making a living was a task in that particular time. So at age 16, he started out for the United States. I never did know how he got from New York or why he left from New York and went to Minnesota, except I believe a lot of Scandinavian people ended up in Minnesota simply because it is very much like the Scandinavian countries in the scenery, the lakes, and that sort of thing. And my mother's family was from Sweden. My mother's father had heard about the wonders of America, and he decided he would make a trip to America himself to check it all out before he decided to take his family of 4 children and his wife. And he came back and was very satisfied. And so this family went to America and also settled in the state of Minnesota.
What was your grandfather's name?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. What was the family name, the last name?
Oh, Peterson.
Peterson.
Excuse me,
yeah.
yes.
S-O-N?
Yes,
Okay.
excuse me, I do remember he was Carl Peterson. Hmm. Some of this comes back once in a while.
Right. Do you remember Grandma's first name?
No, I don't.
No?
No,
Okay.
I don't. And
So the 4 children, how old were they when they came?
my mother was 16, and let's see, there was one brother of hers that was younger, and then there were 2 were older than 16. So I suppose from age,
So they were kind of grown children.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And they also found their way to Minnesota. And then my mother went to work in St. Paul, and my father was working there as in building, and there they met.
What kind of work was she doing?
She was like a maid in one of the large homes. Mm-hmm.
My mother did that, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
It's common.
I suppose without any further education, this was a job that they could have.
Sure.
Mm. And they met in St. Paul and were married in, I believe it was 1914. My father also had made many trips back to Finland. It was when he left to go to America, he said he wanted to help his family. So he saved a lot of his money and took it back to his family to help them. So he had made many trips back and forth from the time he arrived at age 16 until they were married. I'm not sure how old he was when he was married, but I think very close to 30.
Oh, okay.
So he had made many trips, and this was a trip that they both were making to his homeland in 1914.
You think they went right after the wedding? Or shortly after?
Shortly after, I believe.
Mhm. He
Um,
wanted to show his family or introduce his family to his wife.
that's right.
They hadn't known each other in Scandinavia.
No, they hadn't.
Well, that was nice. Okay, well, excuse me. You interrupted.
So I made a trip there several years ago, probably about 10 years ago
Well,
now.
finish telling about that they went over in 1914.
Yes.
And what happened?
I don't believe they intended to stay for 7 years, but that's what happened. And from what I understood, chatting with my parents, is at this time they were not citizens of the U.S. The war broke out, World War I. Here they are in Finland. They aren't citizens of the U.S. yet. And I don't know if they lost their citizenship from Finland or Sweden when they left those countries.
Yeah.
So here they were, a couple without a country, and could not get back to the U.S. Consequently, they lived there. My brother George was born in Finland, and they stayed there for 7 years. During the 7 years, my father, who was a builder of homes, continued to do that. I remember during the war, part of the war, he said that he was not able to join the army because he was not a citizen of the country, but he could have a job such as being a guard on a bridge of importance.
Oh.
And then later on, he started building homes there, built one for his own family, my mother and young brother, and he built some other homes. Did that click off?
No, that was my chair.
Oh, I see. And he built a home in the American style with foundation and a basement. And most of the homes in Finland are not built that way simply because the ground is so rocky that you cannot, at that time, without the new machinery, you cannot dig a basement. So their homes were built on the rock, and then with many trees, or small trees, I should say, and lumber, built up that as a foundation on the rock. So this was a new type of home, and people would stand around, he would tell me, and they would watch the building of this house. And all of them were afraid that the house isn't going to stand on this hole. It's going to fall right into it. And so when I was there, I did see 2 of the homes that he had built, and the one he had built for themselves. They were still there, looking good, very strong homes, and they were known as the American homes. So 7 years later, they did make it back to the U.S. Do you want to turn this off and
No,
answer your
no,
phone?
machine
Okay. My mother's family was in Minnesota, so that was where they went first because they could stay with them. And shortly after that, well, not shortly after, but I think they arrived in America on this trip back in during a May.
So around 1921.
Yes, and I was born in December.
Oh, okay.
During that first year, of course, my mother stayed in Minnesota, and my father went to Evanston, Illinois, to work. How or why or how he heard about it or why he went there, I do not know or think I ever heard, but that's where we ended up living and enjoyed it.
So did you go there like when you were just an infant yet?
Yes.
Yeah.
And after my father got situated in a job and a place to live, I can remember the apartment that we lived in while he was also at that time building a house for us.
Oh.
And sometimes, I think probably the house was finished by the time I was 2 or 3 years old, because I can remember my mother taking my brother and I on the bus over to this new house being built, carrying the lunch for my father, and checking out what's happening and so on.
Oh, we're not talking. Okay.
Okay. Yes, it's very interesting.
Did he work with Mr. Cedarberg
I'm sure
in Evanston already?
Yes. So he must have been working with John Cedarberg. And they became very good friends. Actually, John Cedarberg and his wife, Hilda, were Scandinavian people, and I think that's what made them feel very close and very
Sure.
good friends. And they didn't live too far from us when we had moved into our new house. So that friendship with the Cedarbergs and the Ogrens, Hilda Cedarberg was the daughter of the Olaf and his wife, Ogren, who lived outside of Roscommon. And I remember that we would celebrate Christmases in Evanston with the John Cedarbergs, and Harold Ogren, I remember, was a visitor one of the Christmases and was Santa Claus.
Oh.
And I was probably 5 or 6 by this age. And so when we moved to Michigan, and they also moved to Michigan.
So had they come first?
Yes, they were here first.
Before your family came.
And after we had moved here, we still continued to have Christmases together.
Oh, nice.
So that was a very fine memory of childhood.
Why, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Then, of course, the years of living in Evanston until 1932, from about 1922, were very wonderful years. And started school there. Everyone enjoyed it. We had a new member of our family, my sister Eva, and we always had...
What year was she born?
She was born in 1926.
Oh, okay, so you were 5 years old already. when she was
Yes.
born. You remember all that.
Yes. We always had very fond memories of living there. Uh, we enjoyed so many of the museums, the planetarium, the aquarium, the Fields Museum of Chicago. I mean, we were always able to go to these places. It was part of our early memories. And after we were in Michigan, our treat was always to go to Evanston, stay with some friends there for a week or so, and continue seeing some of these places
Yeah.
that we had
Did you do
loved.
that every summer?
Yes.
Or did you?
Mhm.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
Beautiful.
Now it is the late 1920s, getting into the 1930s. The Great Big Depression comes along, and nobody is building houses. My father is now out of work, and he knows that you cannot stay in the city and spend all of your money living there without work, so we must do something else. Um, his very good friend John Cedarberg and his wife, who was originally from the area of Roscommon, came back to Roscommon and suggested to my father that he make a trip and look at some land to buy or a home to buy and to move our family here out of the city that is going to be too expensive. So this is how these men began to work together, not immediately, but as work became available or people were coming to this area for recreation, building a home, building homes on the Asable River or one of the lakes. So here was the opportunity for these men, John Cedarberg, my father, and Harold Ogren, who had already lived here, began building homes. And this was very successful for them. They built homes on the Asable, in the area around the lakes, and so they continued their work as carpenters for quite a few years, many years after that.
Sure. Where was one of them like a mason, or were they all carpenters?
No, they were all carpenters, and John Cedarberg was the boss, and his partner then was his brother-in-law. But they hired my father, who was a very excellent finish carpenter, building cabinets, putting in paneling, making window sashes, and doing things like that that you didn't just buy at that point
All
in
handmade,
time.
yeah.
All handmade.
Do you remember the names of any of the people for whom they built homes on the river or anything?
The only one that I remember, and I'm sure I heard many names, and at this point my memory doesn't do me justice.
I think you're doing fine.
I do remember only one. I don't remember the name of the man at this time, though, but the president of American Motors built a home some on the Asable River. And my father would describe the houses and the work he had done, and very proud of his work that he had done and the beautiful homes that were constructed.
Neat. So then your sister was born here. No, your sister was born in Evanston.
Yes.
So you were 10 years old when you came here, 11.
I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In
So you
fifth grade.
started fifth grade?
Started in
Okay.
the fifth grade.
Did you find it friendly?
Uh, well, here we were, out of the city, 2 miles now, out of a town of Roscommon.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see many friends right away.
Probably not.
No.
How did you get to town? Now, they already had car? Your folks
Yes.
had a car?
Yes, yes.
Were there school buses already then?
Oh, yes, there were school buses. We took a school bus to and from school every day.
Who was your teacher? Remember one of your teachers?
Pardon?
Do you remember your teacher in the fifth grade?
Yes, I remember her, and she was Miss Watson. I think maybe it was Janet Watson.
Oh.
And that was the fifth grade.
Was the transition easy from the city school to this one, as far as difficulty of the work, of the studies?
Well, I don't know what it would have been like for other children. I adjust very easily, and it must be that everyone in our family adjusts very easily.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't unhappy. I didn't think this was a tremendously difficult adjustment to school or to living in this area. I just took it all and handled it.
Sure, it was what your family had decided to do, so that was what you did.
That's right.
Yeah, you didn't fuss about
Mm-hmm.
it. Yeah.
And I still adjust today about the same way.
You're doing, yes, you do. That's great. So tell us about what your father purchased then when they came here.
So he bought this house on a hill 2 miles outside of Roscommon, and this large house that was
How much land?
and 60 acres of land. It's not that when he moved here he intended to make his living farming, but I have always heard and I've always thought and always believed you can take the boy out of the land, but you can't take the land out of the boy.
Mm-hmm.
So it was part of his early life,
Mm-hmm.
and so he was glad to have 60 acres and had a horse, and I believe he built a barn. He did build a barn. We had a cow.
Had the land, was all that land cleared already?
Yes.
Were there trees?
No, it was all cleared. Mm-hmm. It was a good meadowland
Mm-hmm.
with lots of grass growing.
Mm-hmm. And we're talking about the house on County Line Road, which is now Federal Highway, they call it. It was M76 for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about the house that now belongs to Bob and Shay Anderson, that property.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we are.
Mm-hmm. And you know, at age 10 and my sister 4 years or 5 years younger, it was sort of like a lark.
Mm-hmm.
Here you have this big old house, and let's have fun.
Sure, why not? So tell us about the house.
The house, first of all, we only lived in part of it. The part that is now designated as a historical piece of the house and is in Roscommon was the living room. There was a big kitchen. It was next to the living room. It could have been the dining room before, but it was a kitchen and dining room, and that we occupied, and a very large bedroom we occupied, and there was a stairway going upstairs, and it was able, the bedroom upstairs was able to have a small wood stove put in it, and that's where my brother had his bedroom. And the rest of the house, uh, let's see, if you went beyond what we called our kitchen, there was another large room which must have been a kitchen. And then there were two small rooms and a stairway, a back stairway that went upstairs. Upstairs, if you took the back stairway, you didn't go into 2 or 3 small bedrooms. You came into half of the upstairs that was one big room. If it was ever used, it must have been like for a dormitory room.
Oh.
Towards the front of the house, and near the front stairway, there was my brother's bedroom, and there were 2 other small bedrooms. But then there was this great big half of the upstairs.
So what room did you go to for that front stairway?
From the front stairway, you went up to my brother's bedroom.
Right, but where was that stairway? In that living room?
No, at the side of this huge kitchen or
okay.
dining room.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
That was the
Mhm.
back room. This
Mhm.
one next to what we had.
Yes.
I got it.
Okay.
Neat.
Some.
So was there a basement under it?
No, there was not a full basement.
And that house was 50 years old when your parents bought it.
Yes.
It was built in 1882. What
There
color
was-
was it? Was it painted?
Yes, sort of a light tan color.
Were
Sort
the
of-
inside rooms mostly wallpapered or
No,
painted?
I think they were just painted. I don't remember any paper at all in any
Oh.
room.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember the floors. They were wood floors, not too even, and maybe that's because there was only a cellar basement, a partial basement, called a cellar, and the rest of the house, what kind of a foundation it had, I don't know. But I know that the floors were rather uneven.
How did you access that cellar? Was that just an outdoor access, or was there
No,
access from inside?
it was inside, towards the back of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my mother scrubbing those boards, floorboards, with cleaning solution and Clorox until they turned almost white. It was a job for her to make the house livable.
Mm-hmm.
And here we were with a wood kitchen stove. That was new to us. A wood stove in the living room, and a little stove up on the second floor bedroom. It was a big change, and probably the biggest change, and I don't remember complaining about it, she just accepted it, was an outdoor outhouse.
Mm-hmm. Part of the scenery, huh?
I think so.
But you had running water. in the
No,
house. No, you had
it
to-
did not have running water. There was a pump outside, and later on my father built a pump house. I don't think there was a pump house to begin with. But you pumped your water outside,
Carried it in.
carried it in.
Mm.
Looking back, I know it must have been more difficult for my mother and father as adults than it was for us children
Mm-hmm. Sure.
to make these changes,
Sure.
to live this way.
Mm-hmm.
But
You think your mother was happy here?
I don't know as she was to begin with. But she
I
was
think about these people leaving their homeland and, you know, but now her parents stayed in Minnesota.
yes.
Did you visit those once a year or something?
No, my father was not one to take us on trips, that type of thing. So we did not visit relatives, well, we didn't have very many, but we didn't make those trips.
So you didn't see those grandparents?
No. Oh, eventually, maybe when I was about 16, we did.
Wow, isn't that something?
Mm-hmm.
And so your cousins, your aunts and uncles, weren't near them either?
Didn't really know them. Mm-hmm. And my mother had, one of her brothers lived in St. Paul. Another brother, her older brother, had a farm in Minnesota. We did visit that. This was later on. This was not when I was 10 years old. Probably 16.
So your parents both died here in Roscommon?
Yes.
Lived here when they died?
Yes. Did you turn it off? No.
Well, tell us now about your father taking this house down.
Oh, yes. I'm trying to remember exactly. Oh, I will get it. Eva and I belonged to the Girl Scouts. And Ruth, I can't think of her last name. She was the sister of Leo Wallace, who taught here.
Oh. Well, her name was Wallace when she was Ruth Wallace, and then she became Ruth Geister?
Yes, that was it.
Okay.
And what was her husband's name?
Oh, I don't know.
Anyhow, we, and this was like that Janet Watson went with us on the trip.
She was a leader?
Yes, leader, or
Just adult companion?
yes. And we tented. And we,
Were there like 8 or 10 girls? A big group?
yes, there were. And we traveled in a truck with a tarp over it. And I'm trying to think exactly. I think we went north and came down the west side of Lake Michigan to Chicago. And it was a big trip. We went to parks, state parks or whatever, put up our tents, cooked our food, stayed for maybe 2 nights or so. When we would get in the truck and be on our way after packing up everything, we just traveled for miles and miles in the back of that truck.
So it was a good trip?
It was. It was when I think of it and think back. But when you compare it to the trips that the kids take today, it was.
Well, it was a different time. A different time. That was a wonderful thing that they took you that far.
Yes.
Yeah. And so when you came home?
Yes, the house was gone. The house was torn down. And my brother and my father were the only two who worked on it and tore it down.
Wow.
Piece by piece. I mean, they just didn't put an explosion in there.
Right. Did they reuse some of the lumber, do you know?
I don't think so. In fact, I don't know what happened to all that lumber.
So your mother, where's your mother then? When all this was going on?
Of course, she was a great helper for everyone. And of course, her job was to try and cook and keep them happy. And I don't know how they lived, you cannot conceive of people doing these things today.
Yeah, right. So the room that he saved then, this living room, did she set up a cook stove in there?
She must have.
Yeah.
She must have.
She must have.
She must have. Because she had to cook food for them. So they would have had, maybe they moved in that little old kitchen cook stove that we had. And
Edna said that your mother and you two girls slept in their bunkhouse.
yes,
Now this is we're talking about Everett and Agnes McCready's home across the street from where you were.
mm-hmm,
And they had gotten married in 1931 and
Yes.
moved in with Everett's father, Ben.
Yes.
Ben McCready. Was he still alive when you were there?
yes, he was.
You knew the grandfather. What do you remember about him?
He was very friendly. You know, he would chat with us. That's about it.
What do you remember? Do you remember sleeping over there in that bunkhouse?
Oh, yes, I do. I do. We had some of our clothing there, and we did our homework there. I don't remember eating there. Where we ate, where she cooked, I'm not sure.
Was there electricity in that building for you to
Oh,
do your
yes.
homework?
Yes, there
And
was.
you had electricity in the old house?
No,
Oh, you didn't even have
no.
electricity?
There was no electricity in
Really?
the house.
Gosh.
No, there were kerosene lamps, or there was a gas lamp. An old gas lamp where you
Where you pumped
plunge
it up?
air in it, light the mantles. No, there was no electricity in the old house.
So when he built the new house, then tell us about that.
Yes, what a thrill. First of all, it was warm and very clean and very bright and nice. So we were all thrilled. Eva and I had had a bedroom together. My brother had his own bedroom, and my mother and dad had theirs. And it was a simple house. There was a living room and a kitchen and dining room together in one room. It was a simple house. It was not.
I bet it had a basement.
Yes, it did. Mhm. Yes, it did. And I think,
So
well,
what kind of heat was in that then? So what year was this that your father built this house?
1937? Does that sound? Yes, about 1937.
You were about to start high school then.
I was in the 10th grade. So, yes, we were
Yeah, you're right.
very happy there. We were in the spring thinking about putting in a lawn, planting flowers. It was just exciting.
Did your parents have a vegetable garden?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Right from when they first came, I imagine.
Yes. Yes. There was always a vegetable garden. As I said, once you've been on the land, that's what you do.
Tell us about your father's horse. Was that the only animal? Did he have some cows?
We had one cow later on, but the first animal that he had was this big black horse called King. King was, the only thing I think he did was he put us around on a huge sled in the wintertime on the snow. And I think in the summer he pulled the mowing machine to cut the hay.
Mm-hmm.
But he was, to my father, a very precious and important animal.
Mm-hmm.
And we did have one cow, so we had fresh milk.
Did you have to milk the cow?
No, can remember telling my mother I would like to learn to do that. And she absolutely refused to teach me. You do not need to do it now, and you will not need to do it later in your life. No, you are not
Really?
going to learn.
Really? So who milked the cow? Did your brother get to milk it?
No, he didn't.
No.
I think it was my mother who
Just your
did it.
mother. It was
Mhm.
her thing.
Yes.
Did your parents speak their native language in the home? Did you learn any
Swedish? Yes. And truthfully, they spoke very, very good, correct English. Today I am astounded when I hear people making grammatical errors in their speech. But they very much were very aware that they were to learn the English language, learn it correctly, and use it very correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother never made mistakes. She had a beautiful vocabulary, spoke very well. My father did a great deal of reading, constantly reading. But when they were alone and talking with each other, they spoke in Swedish.
Mm-hmm.
And after listening to it for a great length of time, and I listened carefully because I was always very inquisitive, and I wondered what they were saying. So I listened very carefully, and in time, I don't know how much time, but I could understand anyone speaking Swedish.
Really? Wonderful.
I could not read it, did not try to read it, did not try to speak it. But if
Now, if they lived in Finland for 7 years, they must have written back and forth to those people all their life then, I would imagine.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
They would have letters coming.
Yes.
Neat. That's just neat. Well, tell us a little bit about the other Swedish families that your parents associated
Yes.
with and the little church they started.
Yes. My mother's social activities mainly was the Ladies' Aid Society from the church. The ladies always had these, I'm not really sure why they had so many coffee clutches, whatever it's called.
Well, it was their social life.
It
That's when they got
was.
to visit each other.
And so somebody would give a coffee at their house and all the ladies would go there.
Mm-hmm.
The next week it was at someone else's house. And these were her very good friends and lasting friends.
Mm-hmm.
And she enjoyed it.
Sure. You remember some of their names?
Well, I remember the Alex Johnsons. They had a daughter, Lillian, who was about my age. I remember the Soderholms, the Ostlings, the Matsons, the Martinsons. These Oh,
Yeah, and they
that's,
started that little Messiah Lutheran church, right?
yes.
Yeah.
I don't think they built it, wasn't it there?
It was the Wayne School. It was a one-room schoolhouse. And
Oh, it was.
the ladies group purchased it.
Oh, I see.
That's what it says in the church history.
Okay, I believe you.
Yeah.
Was very friendly. Loved being with people. And she would walk. It was 2 miles from our house to walk to the Ogrins,
Oh, okay.
the older couple. And
You mean Harold's parents?
yes,
Okay.
That's right.
Olaf and
Olaf and
I forgot her name.
Sophia, I think.
Oh, okay.
And my mother would walk the 2 miles to Ogren's, and Mr. Ogren would drive the ladies to the house wherever they were going to have coffee.
Oh, isn't that nice?
And then she did a lot of walking to go to coffee.
Been at home?
No, no, no.
So she lived, yeah, that's right, you would have been gone.
No. In fact, when my mother died, she was 72. I was 38, and the day she died, I was in a hospital giving birth to my second child, John, and got that news. And she actually had been a very, very healthy person all her life. There was no heart trouble, other diseases, but she did have an ulcerated varicose vein. And of course she carried wood into the house for the stoves that we heated the house with. And one piece of wood had a piece sticking out that hit her leg as she was carrying it, and hit this varicose vein, which became ulcerated, and eventually it would form clots, which is what ended her life at the age of 72.
And your father? So are your folks buried here?
No, they're buried here, yes.
Are they?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And my father...
Well, let's not go to him passing. Let's say, how long did he work in building houses? Because he was he was in his 40s by the time he came here.
Yes. Oh, I'd say he worked until he was 70 anyhow.
Really? Good for him.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was a very hearty, hard-working, healthy man.
Mm-hmm.
And wanted to keep working. So when my mother died at 72, he was about 4 years older, I think. So he was mid-70s, and was completely lost. Completely lost. Had been completely dependent upon her for many things, and was lost when her death occurred. He lived at the house alone for maybe 2 years, and then my brother took him to live with him in his apartment in Detroit. And there he lived until, well, he became ill. He was in the hospital, and he died in a hospital there. Mm-hmm. But was buried.
But his funeral was here.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And then George had the house.
Yes, George had the house. I believe he always made trips, weekend trips to Roscommon and to the home.
Well, tell us about his airplanes. was flying.
Oh, yes, flying. Flying for George, I can remember in Evanston, this was when I was very young and he was. And he would ride his bicycle to an airport where there were small planes, just to be there, to watch these planes, to see them fly, to talk with the pilots. So this was a love from early childhood to the point when he bought a plane and it needed to be completely recovered, which he did. And I don't know anything about the motor, but I suppose.
But he did that in Roscommon or where he was living in Detroit?
In Roscommon.
In Roscommon. So he used that barn to work on the airplane.
Yes, or wherever he had his plane, there was a hangar, and he worked there. And so he met a friend at an airport, maybe around Houghton Lake, I think it was, who flew small planes, had a plane of his own, became a great friend of George's, taught George how to fly, and
His name?
can't think
Not
of it
coming?
now.
Okay, that's all right.
I remember now this friend of George's. During these days, he flew from one town to another. Was this called barnstorming? And take people for rides in his plane.
Sure.
Yes. And he also did a lot of aerobatics with his plane.
Did George do that too then?
No,
No.
no, he didn't. And sadly, this friend of George's who taught him to fly, who had done all this barnstorming, who did tricks with his plane, and so these were shows that they would put on in the small towns.
Sure.
And at one of these places, two planes were up in the air and they got too close together, and he was killed that way.
Oh, gee.
Yeah, that was very, very sad. But George's great love, of course, was flying. He bought this plane, rehabbed it, and it was a two-seater. It was a very good plane. I had been in it many times, flying with him from Detroit to Roscommon or flying around here.
Well, that had to be fun.
It was.
Yeah.
It was very good. I don't think he ever let me take the controls. But he would point out the landmarks that you have to
Sure,
know
sure.
and know which way you're going and what landmarks to what.
Did he happen to know that Cliff Durant that flew around here all the time? Well, that would have been earlier. I think Cliff would have been here earlier. Not sure. The one that had the castle built on the river. So,
No, I don't think he knew him. No. So it was his great love.
so after your father died and George, was he still flying at that time?
I don't think so. I don't think so. You're asking me questions that are digging way
Yeah.
back.
It's kind of technical.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Well, so eventually George sold the house then, after your father died.
It was left to George,
Uh-huh.
which is as it should have been. And
He was a single man.
yes. And he didn't sell it. It,
Did he keep it till he died? Did he?
yes, he did.
Oh, okay, so he
Yes, he did.
he retired and was up here some after he retired.
I think he still spent most of his time in Detroit.
Mm.
He would come up here once in a while. But after George's death, the land and the house was sold.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, let's get back to what you remember about going to high school here then, and tell us a little bit about that. Were you in? We talked about Girl Scouts, but what else were your interests in high school?
Actually, I enjoyed school a lot. It's not like the kids today that are on soccer teams, swim teams, sailing teams. Uh,
What
it was just school.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And our class would have parties, and here I was 2 miles out of town, and I would have friends who would say, well, we're having a party, and you can come home with me, stay overnight, and we'll, go to the party. So I can't believe that the social life was not that abundant for us.
Well, that's the way it was.
It was.
But you were certainly content. Like you said, you played. Tell us about, you mentioned one time the little girls that sometimes were staying with the McCready's.
Yes.
That would be your playmates.
Yes, that's right. That's right. No, there were always playmates, and then I remember maybe a mile down the road from us towards town was Rosemary and Elizabeth King, who lived with their parents in a little house along the way. And yes, we would just get together and play on weekends or...
Was there a theater in town when you were in high school?
No, I don't believe so.
No? Then you graduated in what year?
1940.
And how many were in your class?
19 students.
Wow.
Yes, yes,
And then you went on to college.
yes.
Did you have summer jobs at the lake in the summertime or what?
No, I think some couple of summers I worked in town for a family who had a new baby, and I did I did some of the house cleaning. One summer I worked out on the lake taking care of 2 little kids. Mm-hmm.
Did you like that?
Yes, that was good.
Yeah. Did you stay right in the house the whole time?
Yes, they had their house, and then there was an empty house next door, and I stayed in there.
Yeah, that was neat. And so then had George gone to college ahead of you, or were you the
No.
first one to go to college?
No, George didn't go to college. George continued with his work as a carpenter, and when he moved to Detroit to work, this is exactly what he did there. And
So had your father apprenticed him?
had he what?
Did he learn all this from your father?
Yes, he did. He did learn it from my father, and he was very good at it. And even today,
So did he work for Mr. Cedarberg also, George?
for a short while,
Did he?
but then he went with a builder in the Detroit area, in fact, who built homes in Grosse Pointe. And I remember George would take me around. This is the house we're building now. And even today I can drive by and remember that that's where he worked.
Great, great.
And the owner of this building company thought so much of George and George's work that when he was ready to retire, he wanted to give this company to George, this building company. And I could not understand why he didn't accept it. He said, I can do the work, I can build, I can do all of the fine work, but the business end of this I do not understand.
Oh, well, he was smart then not to
Yes.
take on something that
Yes.
he didn't do.
No, he didn't. But
Did Eva go to college also?
yes, she did.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Well, that was neat. So you had, how much education had your parents had over in their home countries? That was so different than here, probably.
Pardon?
It was probably very different than here anyway.
I believe the 8th grade.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That was typical of that generation.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yes, it was. Plus, partially self-educating yourself throughout your life.
Sure.
Mhm.
Well, you said they had such a good command of the English language.
Yes.
So they
Mhm.
were
Mhm.
intent on that.
All in all, it's been a good life, a
Mhm.
good family,
Mhm.
good to have the siblings that I had, and the experience of living in the city, the experience of living out in the country, uh, helps you to know people uh, from different perspectives,
Mhm.
to understand them better, and I have appreciated it all.
Mhm. Well, that's good. Well, you did fine.
Thank you.
That is neat. Well, I think, can't think of anything else to ask you about the house. So the new house that your father built in 1936, did it have electricity? Did I already ask you that?
It did not have it immediately, but uh, very soon.
Oh, okay.
Hmm.
So it was heated also with wood stoves.
That's right.
To start with. Wow.
My
That's something,
father
isn't it?
was very, very
Frugal?
conservative.
Oh,
Um, I guess he didn't believe in any frills.
That was good. Well, is there anything else you want to tell us about, that you remember about Roscommon? Did you, um, you must have had doctors here? What kind of health care did you
Well,
have?
this was very different from today. You didn't go to a doctor unless something was wrong.
Right. And very wrong, probably.
Yes,
Yeah.
very different from what my medical situation is today, where you have all these specialists.
Yeah. And I imagine your mother knew home remedies
Yes,
for when you had colds and that sort
yes,
of thing.
yes. And I can remember I had tonsillitis and was home from school for about a week. And my mother would say to my father, someday she must have a surgery and get rid of her tonsils. Well, if it's not necessary, we won't do it.
That was his answer, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you ultimately have them out?
No, I
No?
still have them.
Very good. Very good. Okay, well, I think we've covered most everything. Your family were pioneers, but not the earliest ones that came here, but
No.
they were the ones that came and built things up
Mhm.
right after the Depression. So, I was going to ask you about World War II. You were in college when that occurred.
Yes.
So, what effect did that have on your life? Do you remember?
Yes, of course, it was devastating to hear the news all the time, and you felt very involved. And then, as a short time would go by, You had friends who were in the Army. Yes, it had a devastating effect to think about what was happening. As the family, our family itself, uh, my father would listen to the news, no TV at that time, as remember, would listen very, very carefully to every news broadcast. And of course, not only, well, it was the U.S., but also Russia and Finland were fighting. And I had a cousin there who had been strafed as he walked along a road, strafed and shot by a Russian plane. So my family was upset. It was his homeland that was also at war with Russia. Yes, it had an effect upon all of us.
Do you think that, well, yeah, that's obvious. Forget that. That was a silly question. We covered your entertainment, your transportation. How did you get down to, did you have someone take you in a car to go to college? You went to Central?
Yes, that's right. They took me down. We looked for a place to live. I found it, and it was a house, you know, with a house mother in there and so on. And there were four of us that roomed together. We had 2 bedrooms in this house and a little kitchenette. And we did our studying there. And those 3 other girls became lifelong friends of mine.
Sure. Were they all teachers like you?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And there was one left, and she lives in Lansing. And I usually go to visit her once a year, and I must do that this year too.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, they became lifelong friends.
And you taught how many years?
I taught 16 years. I taught in a little town near Saginaw, Hemlock,
Oh.
for 2 years. And then some of my friends were teaching in a Detroit suburb. And of course at this time, teachers were hard to find, so she talked to the superintendent. My roommate that I had at that time, and then I taught in Ithaca after Hemlock, then Ithaca, and then to a suburb in Detroit. Altogether 16 years. 16 very useful, wonderful years. I enjoyed it.
At what grade level did you teach?
I taught the 5th grade for all those years.
Wonderful.
Different schools. Enjoyed it.
Great. Well, we appreciate your time and that you shared all this with us, and it was very nice. And we thank you very much. And we should say too that you are a member of the Roscommon Area Historical Society, so see how much you contributed because you're a member.
Well,
So,
thank you.
Okay.